Hello, hello everybody. So welcome. I'm Juliana. I'm part of Grajales bookings team, and I wanted to welcome you to this webinar that Anthony has kindly organized to let you know a bit about his breathwork training course, which I believe will enhance your Aconcagua experience. So, Anthony, I will leave it to you to present your program. And if you need anything or you have any inquiry, please feel free to reach out to Grajales' official email, and we will gladly answer any question. So, Anthony, all yours.
All right. Thanks so much, Juliana. I appreciate it. Hey, everybody. Welcome to our session today on breathwork training for mountaineers. And when it comes to mountaineers, we're talking today specifically those mountaineers attempting to climb Aconcagua this coming year with Grajales. So this is the exclusive Grajales webinar. I'm Anthony Lorubbio. I am from a company called Recal Training. We specialize in breathwork training for mountain athletes. And I'm excited to be jumping in with you. So a couple of administrative things just right out of the gate. On whatever platform that you are watching this stream, this live stream, you can go ahead and send a chat up into that platform's text window. So feel free to send your questions there at any point in time. I will be monitoring this as we go. I am going to keep our questions for the very end, though, just so that you know. So I will look to address that in the end. That way we can just keep things flowing and all of that. But to begin, what I would love to do is inside that chat window, if you want to go ahead and send a message of where you are calling from, and not only if you have an upcoming expedition, if you are in fact climbing with Grajales this upcoming season at Aconcagua, I would love to hear that information from you. Again, I'll be monitoring the chat as we go, and I might be able to give out a few shout outs and whatnot as we go. So with that, as those messages start to pile in here, I'll go ahead and kick things off here. So I want to address, first of all, the background photo that we have, and specifically call out the fact that there are some people that actually have done breathwork training with me and with Recal from this past year, actually. So as you can see from the photo there, we've got Martin, Dave, and Alan. They were breathwork training clients actually from 2024. They climbed with Grajales last year. And as you can see, they are at the top of Aconcagua with their guides, Wenny and Augustine. So just a little note that there are some success stories, as you can see from the breathwork training from this past year. Okay, so with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and kind of maximize our window. Let's frame the discussion today about breathwork training by calling out a little article in Sweat Science by Outside. You may be familiar with this column. This is a column with Alex Hutchinson, the author, also the author of Endure, one of the kind of big pieces of literature on endurance, especially in the mountains. And what he says is training your breathing muscles to prepare at altitude. When you head to altitude, you have to breathe more deeply and more frequently to compensate for that scarcity of oxygen in the thin air at altitude. That means that these muscles, your respiratory muscles, have to work harder than normal. And they absorb up to 15 to 30% of the total oxygen that you actually get into your body when you're up at altitude. And these muscles eventually can get tired. So training those muscles should prepare you to handle the extra workload of breathing at altitude. So this is what we're going to talk a lot about today, is what muscles are engaged when breathing at altitude, and what are some of the adaptations and training that you can do specifically for these muscles and your overall breathing system that's going to help you perform better at altitude. So our agenda, we're going to talk about, as I mentioned, some of the challenges that your respiratory system faces at altitude. What exactly is breathwork training? What does the research literature then say about breathwork training? You are going to have an opportunity today to get your own breathing assessments. We are going to walk through a few assessments today. And then you're also going to get a taste of the training itself. We are going to do some breathwork training protocols and exercises today. And then we'll talk about what you can do moving forward from this point. Okay? But let's first at least introduce who the heck I am, your presenter here today. I am the founder of a company called Recal. As you can probably tell from the many places on this live stream that the word Recal is peppered in here. It's short for recalibrate, as in recalibrate the way that you breathe, recalibrate the way that you train for the mountains. I am a certified breathwork training instructor, first in a field of breathwork training called Oxygen Advantage, which maybe some of you are familiar with. It's breathing for sport and performance. I am also certified in the Wim Hof method. If you're in fact familiar with the Wim Hof method, go ahead and throw a comment into our chat window. If you know the Wim Hof method, would love to hear from my fellow Hoffers out there. And then also something called peak flow, which again is breathwork training for performance and optimization purposes. Then out of doing all of these different types of breathwork training modalities and certifications, I ended up landing on discovering this little niche side of breathwork training that focused on breathwork training specifically geared toward high altitude. And over the course of researching and testing and being my own guinea pig on these own protocols and my own adventures and endeavors in the mountains, we eventually created the high altitude breathwork training program. And since then, we have released it out to the world and have had hundreds of athletes do the high altitude breathwork training program and seen success on the mountains, highlighted by some of the images that you see on the screen. So that's a bit about me, a little bit about my background, how Recal came to be, and how our high altitude breathwork training program came to be. Let's take a moment though, and we are going to jump into the first of two breath assessments that you're going to do today on this live stream. This first one is something called the carbon dioxide tolerance test. Now, the way that it works is from a seated position. So this is key that you are seated for this. We're going to do a simple little exercise. I'm going to guide you through taking a normal breath in through your nose and then a normal breath out. Then we're going to take a really deep breath. You're going to try to fill up your lungs as much as you can. And when you reach the very tippy top of that inhale, you'll then begin a very slow exhale. I'm going to start a timer at that point. You're going to begin an extremely slow exhale, and you're going to try to extend that exhale as long as you can. Emphasis here is on keeping the mouth closed, allowing the air to just barely trickle out of your nose, and you're trying to control as little amount of air coming out of your nose as possible. Because again, you're trying to extend this exhale as long as you can. When you get to the very end of the exhale, and either that means your brain is screaming at you that you need to take a new breath, or you actually run out of air and you've squeezed every last bit of air out of the lungs, then go ahead and breathe normally, but take a look at the screen. I'm going to be running that timer, as I mentioned. The time on the screen is going to be your carbon dioxide tolerance test. So that is our breath assessment. Okay. So as you can see, there is a timer already on the screen. I'm going to guide you through this now. Again, from that seated position, go ahead and sit up nice and straight, but relaxed posture. We're going to take a normal breath in through your nose. And now a normal breath out. And now begin that deep inhale. Fill up your lungs as much as you can. Fill up, fill up, fill up. And now begin that slow exhale, keeping the mouth closed. Air is just barely trickling out of your nose. Just relax. Again, control the air. The littlest amount of possible is actually leaking out of your nose. And you're trying to extend this exhale as long as you can. Maybe that urge to breathe is already building up for you. Do what you can to calm that voice in your head and continue to extend the exhale. And whenever you get to the point that you can't extend it any longer and you've squeezed every last bit of air out of your lungs, just take a note of the time that's on the screen for you. If you're still going, great job. If you want to, you can even share the number that showed up for you during this assessment here in the comment window. Good work, everybody. I'm going to let the timer run for just about 5 more seconds. All right. Good work. So if you are still going for that, you are a breathing champion. All right. So you might be wondering at this point, all right, I have my number now. We did this first assessment. How good was my CO2 TT, my carbon dioxide tolerance test? What are the other assessments that you're going to coach us through today? That was one of 2, as I mentioned. And most importantly, how can I actually improve on that one assessment? The answer for you, as of right now, is stick around and find out. We will be doing the other assessment here toward the end, and then we will go over actually what your assessment really means in the real world. All right, so let's dive into something fun now and challenging, I guess. What challenges do you face at altitude, specifically in your respiratory system? Now, I want to note, I make a disclaimer here. I am not a medical doctor, right? I happen to have a very specialized segment of a very large spectrum of things that happen in your physiology at altitude. I'm going to address what happens in your respiratory system, but of course, always consult your doctor before actually heading out onto the mountains and going into high altitude. So let's talk about what happens at altitude, specifically in your respiratory system. The first thing that you might notice right away after arriving at high altitude is an increase in your ventilation. In other words, your respiratory rate. In other words, you feel like you're breathing more often, right? This is a very natural and typically automatic reaction for people when they arrive at altitude. We're going to dive more deeply into why this is the case, but this is one of 3 things I'm going to address that happens at altitude. The second thing that happens at altitude is inside your body, you start to increase the number of red blood cells that you have, or your hemoglobin concentration. Hemoglobin is a protein inside your red blood cell that actually attaches to the oxygen molecules that diffuse into the bloodstream through your lungs and then delivers that oxygen throughout your body. This process of increasing your hemoglobin concentration or your red blood cell count, this is also known as acclimatization, which is something you may have heard before. The last thing that I'll address about what happens in your physiology at altitude is typically you'll experience a decrease in your oxygen saturation levels. That is how much hemoglobin actually has oxygen on it inside your blood. That's your oxygen saturation levels. And what typically happens then as a result of a lowered oxygen saturation, which is also known as SpO2, you may have heard it by that term, is it results in a decrease in your aerobic power, also a decrease in your VO2 max or your total oxygen uptake capacity. Many of you are probably familiar with VO2 max. So those are some decreases that happen to those particular biometrics due to a decrease in your oxygen saturation level. Okay, so great. We've identified some challenges. What exactly does breathwork training have to do with it? So let's make that connection now. Zooming right back out to where we were, again, looking at those 3 challenges that you face with your respiratory system when arriving at altitude: the increase in ventilation, which makes you breathe more often, the increase in the hemoglobin concentration, which requires time, known as acclimatization, and the decrease in oxygen saturation levels. Well, the way that we coach breathwork training at Recal, there's really 3 different and unique sides to it. The first side is something called simply gaining better biomechanical efficiency. Emphasis on mechanical efficiency. This is actually like how you breathe, how you move the air around in and out of your lungs, what muscles are engaged in that, where is the air actually going when you breathe. This is biomechanical efficiency. And then the other side of the coin is biochemical adaptation. And this is directly related. This side of breathwork training is directly related to potentially instigating that process of pre-acclimatization before you actually arrive at the mountain and making some key biochemical adaptations in the body that will actually help you when you arrive at altitude. And then lastly, directly related to that decrease in oxygen saturation level, we work very, very focused on respiratory muscle training, actually training the muscles, improving the strength, improving the endurance of the muscles that are actually engaged in breathing. And this is particularly important when you arrive in that lower pressure air at altitude. And we'll talk more about this. Let's dive into each of these three sides of breathwork training now. So talking about biomechanical efficiency. Breathwork training has the power of improving some of the bad habits that you may already be using when you breathe. You might not even know it today. And maybe through some of these assessments, we'll identify some of the bad habits that you have. But breathwork training can actually fix those bad habits and improve the efficiency of your breathing. Now, when I talk about an efficient breath, I'm talking about breathing through your nose, breathing slow and fully. I say fully now because when working with mountain athletes and they're arriving at altitude, it's not necessarily great to always just be slow breathing all the time. It's actually more important to be breathing fully. When you're at rest, when you're near sea level, breathing nose slow and low is most efficient. In the mountains, it's nose full and low. That means low as in getting the air deep into the lungs, which is where the majority of gas exchange or diffusion actually happens into the bloodstream, getting oxygen into the bloodstream. You can also eliminate then with good biomechanics, you can eliminate the impact of dead space, that underutilized or non-utilized space between the edge of your nose, which is where the air comes in, all the way down to the lungs. There's dead space, unused, underutilized air space. So eliminate the impact of that dead space. You can also increase and then actually use your full lung capacity. If you work on your biomechanical efficiency, you'll also be able to engage the diaphragm and your intercostal muscles. Those are the muscles that are primarily engaged in your inhalation, which is very, very important at high altitude. And then lastly, eliminate over breathing. A lot of people think that if I breathe just a whole lot of times, I'm actually oxygenating my body more efficiently. Actually, quite the opposite. Breathe through the nose, breathe slow and full, and breathe low. This is the best way to breathe, not by overbreathing. And I'll actually talk about some of the science behind that here shortly as well. So let's just take a quick dive into some of the literature, some of the research that exists around mechanical efficiency of breathing. We're going to look at just a one study that was done at high altitude with using slow, deep breathing on basically the oxygen saturation levels of, as they call, lowlanders, people that actually live at sea level. And then when they arrived and started climbing at altitudes of 4,600 meters, 5,400 meters, their SpO2 or their oxygen saturation was assessed just after 15 minutes of good biomechanical breathing, also known as slow, deep breathing. And in conclusion from this research study, the SpO2 levels just in the 15 minutes that these people breathed with a more mechanically efficient breath, their oxygen saturation levels increased by anywhere between 7.6% and 9.3%. Again, just by changing the way that you breathe when you're at altitude. So let's zoom back out. Again, we're looking at three sides to breathwork training. Let's zoom into the biochemical adaptation side of breathwork training. Specifically, I want to talk about two different ways that we can train before you actually arrive at altitude to start to prepare the body and make a few key adaptations. The first thing that we coach at Recal is using something called intermittent hypoxic, which means low oxygen, hypercapnic, which means high carbon dioxide, CAP meaning CO2, carbon dioxide training. This is also known as high altitude simulation training. And by doing this, you can do a few really, really key things for yourself. Number one, you can actually increase your hemoglobin concentration. Again, those are your red blood cells. And subsequently, as a result of an increased hemoglobin concentration, that can result in an increase in your VO2 max, that total oxygen uptake capacity. The second thing that you can do by using this intermittent hypoxic hypercapnic training type of protocol is you can increase your carbon dioxide tolerance. Now, you might be wondering, why exactly is carbon dioxide even important in this situation? CO2 is actually your trigger to breathe. If you remember from that assessment that we just did, that was called the carbon dioxide tolerance test. When you were exhaling very slowly and you started to feel that urge to breathe, that urge to breathe has nothing to do with the lack of oxygen in your system. It has everything to do with the rise in the level of carbon dioxide in your blood. Okay. So that feeling of feeling out of breath has everything to do with carbon dioxide, not necessarily oxygen. So if you can train your carbon dioxide tolerance, you can tolerate that rise in carbon dioxide in your blood, you will then actually feel less out of breath, which is, I mean, I don't know anybody that wants to feel more out of breath. So I'm pretty sure that's extremely beneficial, right? But secondly, and this is how it relates to endurance on the mountain. If you feel less out of breath, number one, you can then maintain proper biomechanics to your breathing. Because if you're feeling out of breath, you're going to start to hyperventilate. You're going to start to, your breathing is going to go really out of whack and not actually maintaining that good biomechanical breathing. But importantly, though, it's going to decrease your RPE, your rate of perceived exertion, which is closely tied to breathing. And if you can decrease your RPE, research has shown there's a tight causal correlation between somebody that's not feeling like they're exerting much and their ultimate endurance. So if you breathe less times, you're telling your mind, I'm not actually working that hard, and you can go for longer actually in the mountains through endurance. And the last piece of this is you'll prevent overbreathing, because if you have a weak carbon dioxide tolerance, you're actually going to breathe more times per minute, which is going to be offloading carbon dioxide out of the blood, which throws off the pH of your blood. You actually become more alkaline as opposed to acidic. And there's this special concept called the Bohr effect. The Bohr effect is those little red blood cells that you see in this image. When they connect to the oxygen, they grab it out of the lungs when it diffuses into your bloodstream. That hemoglobin has a certain connection level to the oxygen. And in an environment of a higher pH, we're talking at homeostasis, your body's about 7.4 pH in your blood. It can be 7.5, 7.6, just a slight uptick. The connection between the hemoglobin and your oxygen actually becomes stronger, which means the hemoglobin will not release the oxygen into your muscle tissue or organ tissue or whatever tissue is requiring oxygen in that moment. It won't actually let go of it. So what you want to do is prevent overbreathing, maintain slow, deep, full breathing. That will keep the pH level low enough to allow the hemoglobin to release oxygen to the muscle tissue, which obviously then will prevent that muscle tissue from fatiguing, right? So this is a really, really key part of the entire equation around CO2 tolerance. Feel less out of breath, get more endurance through a decreased RPE, but ultimately get oxygen out of the blood and into the muscle tissue, okay? Let's just briefly here look at literature, and then we're actually going to do a little assessment here in a second, because I know I'm throwing a ton of science at you. Let's look at the effects of that style of breathwork training, which I mentioned, that hypoxic hypercapnic training, and its impact on hemoglobin concentration and subsequent VO2 max. So in this particular study, these test subjects 3 times a week for 8 weeks spend about 30 to 45 minutes doing this IHHT, intermittent hypoxic hypercapnic training. And as a result of these test subjects doing that for 8 weeks, they experienced an increase of 5.35% of their hemoglobin concentration within their blood. And that resulted in an increase of nearly 11% on average for those test subjects in their VO2 max. Again, VO2 max is a critical element to telling us actually what is our total oxygen uptake capacity, which is very important at altitude. So this is a study on IHHT. Okay, take a deep breath. We're going to pause from some of the deep science of this. Let's do another breath assessment together. This breath assessment, the second of two that we'll do in our webinar, just for the sake of time, is called location of movement, or LOM. The way that this one works is, once again, from that seated position, I want you to place one hand on your chest and one hand on your belly. And I want you to look down the front of your body. I'll actually step over here so you can see me better. Look down the front of your body and notice where exactly you're breathing. Between the two hands, one on your chest, one on your belly, do you notice one hand moving more than the other? Again, we're just breathing normally here. Do you notice any movement up and down? Do you notice some movement in the shoulders? Do you notice movement horizontally? Maybe out to the sides? Take just one more breath or so here and just noting to yourself where you actually see and feel the movement. Now, your breathing, you can go ahead and relax. Your breathing falls into one of three zones of movement. Zone 1 is that lower belly, abdomen area. Zone 2 is the middle chest, rib cage area. Zone 3 is upper chest and shoulders. I want to hear from you. Which zone did you feel your own movement? And again, on that platform, you can go ahead and comment which zone you're actually feeling. And I'm just actually looking at the comments. It may be the case that the chat is disabled for this live stream, so I'm sorry about that. Go ahead and note to yourself, and at the very end, I will provide my information, and you can share with me which zone that you feel the movement. So let's talk about this. Zone 1, as you can see in green, this is the area where you really do want to feel that movement happening more than any other area. We want to feel it low. We want to feel it potentially horizontally and not quite vertically. Zone 2 is orange. Zone 3 is red. Stop. We do not want to see a lot of movement in zone 3. So just make a note to yourself of which zone you actually feel the movement. So this is the second of our breath assessments, and a very important one when it comes to the biomechanics of your breathing. Okay, so back to where we were. Zooming back out, the three sides of breathwork training. This third side is the respiratory muscle training side. And specifically, when I talk about respiratory muscles, I'm referring to your diaphragm, which is that first image that you see there kind of on the upper left. It's a dome-shaped muscle that sits right beneath your lungs. When you inhale, it actually flattens out. And when you exhale, it domes or curls back up. So this is the constant motor of your breathing. And secondarily, your intercostal muscles. These are the muscles in between each rib bone in your rib cage. You have the internal intercostal muscles and the external intercostal muscles. The external ones are actually what allow your rib cage to expand up and out, and that changes the thoracic cavity pressure, which allows air to go into those lungs. So your lungs don't actually have muscles. It's the muscles surrounding your lungs that actually get your breathing done. With a proper respiratory muscle training program, though, you can, number one, maintain a higher blood oxygen saturation level, also known as SpO2, just by strengthening these muscles, okay? And especially at altitude. The research has shown that just by training these muscles, you're going to be able to maintain higher blood oxygen saturation levels. Number two, you'll be able to reduce the respiratory muscle fatigue that happens to these muscles. Because again, if they're not used to breathing among thinner air, low pressure air, it requires more effort to bring that low pressure air into your lungs. And through this extra workload that's going to face at altitude, it can actually fatigue. This is something called metabolic reflex. When metabolic reflex sets in, these respiratory muscles fatigue, and all of the blood and oxygen subsequently goes to those respiratory muscles, and they don't go out to your locomotor muscles, your legs and your arms, so that you can actually keep moving. It actually brings all that oxygen in, because breathing is the most vital thing that we do on a second by second basis. You also have an increase in your ability to adapt during acclimatization, which is a very tough period of time for your body, just by having stronger and more well-adapted respiratory muscles. And then lastly, you can improve your breathing economy. Basically, how much calories are actually going toward breathing when you're at altitude, which is a situation, if you're climbing a mountain, you obviously want to move as efficiently as possible, right? The most economically. If you're breathing with muscles that aren't actually designed to do your breathing, the chest muscles, all these other muscles your shoulders are moving with, you're breathing because you're just feeling out of breath and you're kind of constantly trying to pull the air in, then you're going to actually tax those muscles and not the ones that are designed to do your breathing, which decreases your overall economy. But also, it also is related to your RPE, again, that rate of perceived exertion. With good breathing muscles, good breathing form, good breathing rate, you're going to decrease that RPE and allow yourself to actually go further in the mountains. And there are, by the way, both inspiratory and expiratory muscles to train. So you don't just do one or the other. So let's look really quickly here at the literature on this particular concept. So this was a study done on inspiratory muscle training specifically, not expiratory, not exhaling, but inhaling. And its impact of training those muscles on your blood oxygen saturation at altitude. So a group of people 2 times a day for 4 weeks did some targeted inspiratory muscle training exercises before going on an expedition in the Himalayas. When they arrived at altitude, their SpO2 was then tested at various levels of elevation. Okay. They were tested at home. They were tested at 400 meters, 1400 meters, 4,880 meters, and 5,550. Why those numbers? I don't really know. Must have been camps somewhere on the expedition, I assume. In conclusion, what they noticed before even arriving in the Himalayas was their inhale strength, using a metric called maximal inspiratory pressure, MIP, that increased by 15%. So, okay, the training actually worked where they strengthened those muscles. So we showed, all right, training equals stronger. Now, does stronger equal more oxygen saturation at altitude? And this was the key thing that they were testing. They noticed in this research that there was no change for the individuals below 4,880 meters. So basically before the air really got thin, right? But at any altitude 4,880 and above, they noticed on average an increase or a jump by 6% on average, as much as 10% in people's blood oxygen saturation levels, just by strengthening those muscles before they went on the expedition. So if you remember that first piece of literature that we looked at, that first research study, it was about actually changing how you breathe when you arrived at altitude. And they experienced a 7 to 9% increase in their blood oxygen saturation levels. Here, they weren't changing the way that they breathe. They just walked into it with stronger inspiratory muscles. And they saw 6% as high as 10%. If you put those two things together, right, you're really seeing where I'm going. The sweet sauce here is to know how to breathe biomechanically efficient, but then also train your respiratory muscles to be stronger. That together will result in the most optimal oxygen saturation levels at altitude. So, all right, all this research, I spent a lot of time, many years kind of working on this. And my ultimate goal was to bring it out of the quote unquote lab and into the real world so that mountain athletes like you mountaineers that are trying to climb big mountains like Aconcagua with Grajales, how can we actually train and be better prepared for those expeditions? And that is where I then created the high altitude breathwork training program, which its first version of it that's publicly available is a 5-week program. Although I will say I work with athletes that are here, they're trying to climb Everest and they have a whole year with me, all the way up to that last block of fitness training for them, that pre-acclimatization training block, that last 5 weeks before an expedition. And over time, as I mentioned, hundreds of athletes have done this. We've received a ton of great feedback, a lot of positive results. Actually, really no negative, although there was actually one negative result, and I'll actually can address that here at the end during Q&A. It was a really interesting thing that happened with this one particular person, but literally a lot of people have done this training and saw great results. We've also been lucky enough, I guess, to be featured in the media. Even our partnership with Grajales was covered by Adventure Travel Network. And yeah, a lot of people have done great things, gotten media's attention, etc. Okay, let's review your assessments. All right, take a deep breath. Actually, with a little pause like this, why don't we collectively take a deep breath in through the nose, and then just sigh the breath out. One more time. Take a deep breath in and sigh the breath out. All right. Maybe that was just for me even more to kind of put the science and the fast talking behind us. And let's talk a little more interactive here. Let's go through your assessments that you just did. Now, this next slide is going to have a lot of information on it because typically there's 5 assessments that I work with for anybody that's doing breathwork training. We only, for the sake of time, have done 2 of them. So the 5 of them are a BOLT score, carbon dioxide tolerance test, MBT, LOM, and ROM. Now, remember though, we only did 2 of them during this webinar. The CO2 TT, or carbon dioxide tolerance test, and that LOM, location of movement. So what does your score, if you remember back to that score, unfortunately, again, my chat window isn't running, so I don't actually have your your results. Let's see if I can actually change this live time. I'm not really sure if I can. But the carbon dioxide tolerance test, if it was below a 60, there are signs, and these are not my words, these are words from Oxygen Advantage and other writers of respiratory training, signs of dysfunctional breathing if you were below a 60. 20 to 40 is very poor. 40 to 60 is poor to okay. Above 60, that's the threshold I want to see you. And if you're climbing Aconcagua, I really actually want to see you 75, 80 or so on the CO2 TT. And you might be thinking, that's a huge jump from where I am today. I have seen people double their CO2 TTs just in the course of 5 or 6 weeks. The second thing that we did, again, was the zones of breathing during that location of movement. Where are you actually noticing the movement happening with your breathing? Now, zone 1 is the sweet spot. We want to see low movement, and we also want to see horizontal, 360 degrees around your rib cage movement. Zone 2 is not as good. Zone 3 is we don't want to be there. And also, if you notice vertical movement with the shoulders, even with your breathing, that typically is a sign that you're an upper chest breather. Again, this is not mechanically efficient. Now, if you're curious about those other scores, the BOLT score, the MBT, which stands for maximum breathlessness test, and the ROM, which stands for range of motion, I have created a free tool for you to be able to do those. Because again, for the sake of time, we can't do it here right now on this webinar. But if you actually go to that QR code or just directly visit assessment.recal.training, you'll actually enter something which we call the Recal Breath Index. It covers the 5 most important breathing assessments, 2 of which are the biomechanical sides of your breathing, which is your range of motion and your location of movement. And then 3 of them focus on the biochemical side of the equation. So actually, how do you exchange gases with each and every breath? Oxygen coming in, CO2 going out. How are you regulating the pH of your blood? And how do you actually deliver oxygen throughout your body? That's the biochemistry of it. The biomechanics, on the other hand, as you can see and as we've talked about, is how you breathe mechanically, the engagement of your diaphragm, what type of lung expansion that you have, and ultimately, what is the efficiency of the airflow. So again, if you visit that URL, assessment.recal.training, it is a free tool that I created. Follow along with the videos, submit your scores, and I'll actually be able to directly respond to you with feedback and with some protocols, breathing tips, things like that that you can actually use to improve those scores. Okay, now let's do some breathwork training itself. So what we're going to do is go through something that is the most appropriate type of breathwork training exercise, at least when we're on video and on webinar, to do it safely, to do it appropriately. Because again, I'm not with you. I'm not guiding you on video or anything like that directly. I can't see you. So from a seated position, we're going to do this exercise called Breathe Light. This is specifically related to the carbon dioxide tolerance, which again is the trigger to breathe. So if you get better CO2 tolerance, you'll feel less out of breath. From a seated position, what I want you to do is take your pointer finger and place it just beneath your nose, resting on your upper lip. Relax the rest of your body, relax this shoulder. And I want you to take a couple of normal breaths in through the nose and normal breaths out. And I want you to feel the air as it runs across your finger on the way in, and feel that air as it runs across your finger on the way out. On the way out, maybe you notice it's warmer. Maybe there's more moisture in that air on the way out. And now I want you to slow down your breathing. Slowing down your breathing to the point that you can barely even feel the air on your finger as you breathe in and as you breathe out. And by slowing down your breathing and breathing lighter than you normally would, this is inviting this feeling of air hunger. The feeling like you need to take a deeper breath. I want you to breathe so slowly that you reach that point, that you have that air hunger. But I don't want it to be so strong that your breathing becomes totally erratic and you just can't maintain it. There's a sweet spot to this. Tolerable air hunger, but uncomfortable air hunger. What this air hunger means is that your carbon dioxide levels in your blood have gone up, aka the pH of your blood has gone down. This is what we're trying to harness and train here. So for the next 30 seconds or so, stick with it. You're breathing lighter than you normally would. You're barely feeling the air come in and out through your nose. And you're sitting in this oddly uncomfortable meditation with me, training your carbon dioxide tolerance. 10 more seconds now. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Go ahead and relax. Breathe normally. In fact, here's a little protocol to offload CO2. It's called a physiological sigh. Take an inhale through your nose. Pause for a moment. Now sniff in again through your nose. Exhale through your mouth. Let's do 2 more. Inhale. Pause. Sniff. Exhale. Last one. Inhale. Pause. Sniff. Exhale. All right, good. Hopefully you feel a little better. That, by the way, is the single quickest way for you to offload carbon dioxide. And if you're feeling out of breath during training on the mountain and you're not specifically trying to train your CO2 tolerance, you could do that little protocol just 2 or 3 times in a row, no more than 4, or else you'll potentially get lightheaded. But do that to regain control of your breathing. It's a really useful breathing protocol on the mountain, actually. So that was an exercise called Breathe Light. It trains your carbon dioxide tolerance so that, again, you can tolerate more CO2 and feel less out of breath. There's also other exercises, one in particular that's designed to train your inspiratory muscles. This is called hook-lying diaphragmatic breathing. We're not going to do this right now, but you can do it by getting in a hook-lying position on the ground, That means your feet are flat, your knees are at a 90-degree angle. Like the woman in the photo, you could put your hands up on your chest and your lower belly. And what you do here is you breathe deeply in through your nose, engage the diaphragm, exhale through the mouth, maybe 10 breaths or so. Strong inhale, let the air go afterwards. You can add resistance to this exercise. You could by blocking one nostril or adding weight or a resistance belt to your lower belly. This is going to provide resistance training for the diaphragm and your intercostal muscles, which again, strengthen those muscles that then when you arrive at altitude, as you saw in the research, you can then maintain a higher SpO2 or blood oxygen saturation level. The second of the respiratory muscle training exercises that I'll just briefly go over, not that we're going to do it, is a fun one, as you can see from the kids, something called balloon breathing. You can also do it in this position where your knees are at a 90-degree angle on the wall and you're actually laying down and breathing through the balloon. Now, you simply breathe as many times out into the balloon to fill it up as many times as you can in maybe 1 minute, maybe you work your way up to 2 minutes. This is going to help train your expiratory muscles, which if you're practicing something called pressure breathing, which is something you may be familiar with if you're a mountaineer. Pressure breathing is a way for you to exhale with pressure, which increases your SpO2 within your blood. So that is on the respiratory muscle training side. That high altitude simulation, also known as intermittent hypoxic hypercapnic training, there's a lot of variations of this particular exercise. This that I'll just go over briefly here is called the walk to jog variation. And the way that this works is from a standing position, you simply take a normal breath in and then a normal breath out. You pinch your nose and hold your breath and begin walking. When you reach a feeling of strong air hunger, you actually begin a jog. Okay. Yes, this is like, suffering, right? This is suffer training. Nobody said breathwork training was going to be easy, especially making these pre-acclimatization type of adaptations in the body. But don't worry, this isn't all of breathwork training. After you start jogging and you go for as long as you can on that jog, and you just absolutely need to take a breath, you stop, you take 6 minimal breaths, just shuttling air in and out of your nose. Maybe you feel your diaphragm contract because it's trying to force you to inhale. That's good for strength training there. But really, you're training your CO2 tolerance here and the resilience that you have toward that feeling of being out of breath. After those 6 minimal breaths, you come back to normal breathing and then you repeat it. There's a few diagrams if you want to take a moment and take a screenshot of that. This, again, credit goes to Oxygen Advantage for this particular protocol. And again, this is called high altitude simulation, walk to jog variation. Don't worry if you're not capturing all of this. We will have the recording available to you, but also on our platform called Basecamp, which is our training platform for our community, I have a lot of videos on this particular exercise. So all of that's great about training before your expedition. What about breathing on the mountain itself? So we don't just train you how to breathe and then send you on your way. We do cover on the mountain training. So on mountain protocols include something for how to breathe, period. Like, what is the best way to breathe when you're at altitude? I'll give you a hint. I've covered it a little bit already. That's nose full and low, but there are some special cases and other things to mention about that. And I have a lot of videos in the training on this. We also cover something called recovery breathing. So this is great if you're doing an acclimatization hike. So you go up in altitude, then you come back down to, say, base camp, and you're going to sleep there. Recovery breathing. How do you actually get your SpO2 back up, get oxygen out of the blood and into the muscle tissue to actually recover more efficiently? So as you can see, this is useful on the mountain. It's also useful at sea level or wherever it is that you're training. And then lastly, acute mountain sickness breathing is a protocol that helps you combat those symptoms of feeling the altitude, of feeling some lower level acute mountain sickness. I will disclose, though, of course, anytime those symptoms become severe, you could be marching your way into HAPE or HACE, high altitude pulmonary edema, high altitude cerebral edema. And these are obviously more severe, and there is no breathwork protocol for that. It's seek medical attention for that. But for the lighter symptoms, we do have a breathwork protocol for that. So let's quickly, in the next 10 minutes or so, I want to run through some case studies, and then we're going to cover where you can actually go with your own training from here. I'm going to fly through the first few case studies because they're not quite as relevant. We've had clients that have done Mount Rainier and had great experience. Clients that have trekked to Everest Base Camp. We do have a client that summited Everest this past year, him and his daughter, actually. We've got people that have climbed 6,000 meter peaks in Pakistan in 4 days, by the way, which I don't recommend, but somebody did it. And then Cotopaxi in Ecuador. But now let's talk about the mountain that really matters here today with Grajales, Aconcagua. So a typical success rate, and I'm not speaking for Grajales on this one. I don't know exactly what the success rates are for Grajales specifically, but the mountain in general, if you look at a lot of different sources, they typically have a success rate at Aconcagua of reaching the peak, as in success, of 30 to 35%. Okay, so that means 70 to 65% of the people that go on an expedition to Aconcagua, they do not summit. Okay. Now, last year in our first season in Recal, my company's partnership with Grajales, I'm proud to say that we had a success rate of 71%, literally doubled the odds, even a little bit more than that in some cases, doubled the odds of success. And what we're going to look at specifically here in the next minute or so is the case study on a gentleman named Dave Taylor. Dave attempted Aconcagua back in 2023. He did experience a lot of struggles, not the least of which was his high altitude pulmonary edema. And he was taken off the mountain at Camp Cholera at 6,000 meters. If you're familiar with the normal route up Aconcagua, that's a camp at 6,000. And he was taken off the mountain. Now, in 2024, he decided, maybe foolishly, just kidding. He decided strongly, confidently, with a new plan in hand to go back and make a second attempt. And a part of his new plan was he did seek out fitness training program with someone named Lisa Thompson at Alpine Athletics, but also, and more importantly, and relevant for our discussion, he engaged in our breathwork training. And I think we got in touch about 2 months before his departure. As you can see, we were working together virtually. He did take on the personal training package with me, and I'll explain what that means here in a bit. But let's take a look just at his fitness data, okay? And I'm going to blow up my screen here just a little bit to maximize that. So as you can see on the left-hand side, his base fitness level was a 57, according to his Coros watch, at the beginning of his first attempt. His first attempt at Aconcagua, 57, okay? After his attempt, fitness level dropped down. He must have taken it easy for a while, recommendedly so. And then, if you fast forward, he started the mountaineering training program in March, I believe, of 2024. His base fitness level then was a 76. Now, you'll see he started the breathwork training program with me at a base level of 92 for fitness. And over the course of the month and a half or so that we worked together, actually, it looks to be only even 5 weeks. Again, this 5-week period, he went from 92 fitness level up to 122. Okay. And that has a lot to do, and you'll see from some things that he said, it has a lot to do with how much more efficient his everyday training became as a result of doing better breathing. And some of his key takeaways from his experience on the mountain was, number one, it was a drastically different experience. His SpO2 was consistently at 95% whenever it was tested by Grajales staff. He also could feel, and vetted by his heart rate monitor, a much lower heart rate than he saw on his first attempt, an average heart rate of about 107. I think he maxed out on his summit push day of 145. And he said he did not struggle with hyperventilation, which is something he did struggle with his first attempt. And also his sleep quality was better. And lastly, and maybe more importantly than anything, is this breathwork training does work on your mental resilience. And he said that his mental composure was much better than his first attempt. And as you can see, there he is at the top of Aconcagua. If you do want to read the full case study on Dave's experience with breathwork training, his preparation, and then his experience with Grajales as a whole, we did create a case study document. You can read the whole thing if you want. Just go ahead and get your phone out and scan that QR code, or you can just go to bit.ly/Aconcagua case study. So that is maybe the most relevant of the case studies that I want to cover. But if you wanted to chat with me about any other client, lots of other case studies, I'm here for it. So to wrap up, where can you go from here? And yes, I chose a ladder at Everest to show where you can go. Okay. As I mentioned before, we do again have that free tool. I highly, highly, highly recommend utilizing this free resource. Again, this is an assessment called the Recal Breath Index. We were able to do 2 assessments on our call today. There are 5 total that we look at. Again, on the biochemical side of breathing and on the biomechanical side of breathing. So do all of your assessments here by using this free tool at assessment.recal.training. You scan that QR code, go to that link. That's all you need to type in, assessment.recal.training. Spend the next 5 minutes, do the rest of these protocols, submit your scores to me, and I will actually respond to you with direct feedback and also literally training tips and exercises for you to actually train your weakest side of your score, for example. The next thing that I'll go through is Basecamp. So we created a free community platform for training specifically for mountain athletes, and we call that Basecamp. So as you can see, there's a lot of content there, a lot of exercise videos. I actually run a free weekly live stream coaching session every single Monday on this platform. So literally next Monday, if you want to join for free live coaching, you can do that. I'll be running that. And if you miss it live, by the way, there is a recording, so you can catch the recording. But it's nice to have a nice anchor out of the week for your training. There's also challenges that we run on the platform. There are achievement badges. You can put what altitude you've been to before, what mountains you've climbed, all sort of what races you've run if you're into ultra racing. There's FAQs, exercise videos, and really in general, a whole community of mountain athletes. Because again, I think, and I've seen it from clients, that number one, training for the mountains is hard. And sometimes it can feel very lonely. So having a community around that is great. Yes, this is online, but it also can show you people that are near you. And then lastly, no one really loves to go to the Reddit feed all the time to find these niche exercises specifically related to mountain training, or the Facebook groups that can be noisy, negative, etc. This is a clean, pure, more professional platform specifically for mountain athletes. All right, let's talk training plans. So there's 3 ways that you can train. And these are paid options, right? There's a lot of resources that I offer out to the world free, including coming on Monday, next Monday. But the first paid way is probably the most intense version of the training. You can possibly get the most out of your experience by doing the personal training. And this is completely custom pricing for this. So you do have to get in touch with me, which you can do so at anthony@recaltraining.com. Or just visit the website and submit a link. Those plans start at $275 a month, just so you know. There's a $575 package and an $875 a month package, depending on what you want to get yourself into with me. Then I did create an online video course, and this is actually our most popular offering when it comes to training. It is self-paced, so you actually go through the program yourself on your own. There's videos that explain all of the exercises and protocols. So week by week, I'm telling you what you need to get done each and every day. What you should budget, by the way, for this training in general is about 15 minutes or so every single day. And a lot of the exercises are really worthwhile to do right before or after, but typically before any of your other training for the day. So this isn't a ton of time commitment. It's just be diligent about it and do it every single day. So that's the online video course version of the training. Then there is also the most accessible version of the training at only $75. And that is our self-guided version. So you just get this training workbook, you get written descriptions of all of the exercises and protocols and how and when to do them and for how long, and then just fill out the workbook, and that would be your version of the training. We do have the training program on Training Peaks app. So if you do use Training Peaks already, you can get that training program uploaded immediately into your Training Peaks app. And that is also $75 because again, that is like self-guided. But there's special pricing here for Grajales only, literally the only company that I've ever offered discount pricing, because I'm not a huge believer in discounts, but Grajales is a very special exception and an amazing company, by the way. You can get the online video course for $247 or the self-guided for $67. So a little bit of an extra perk there. The last thing that I'll mention in terms of the ways for you to train is if you're looking for the physical training component. And so obviously I've covered the breathwork training, right? There's physical, the legs, the cardio, etc., as well as pre-acclimatization hypoxico training. If you are in fact doing using a hypoxico machine, again, that lowers the fraction of inhaled percentage of oxygen in your environment. Maybe you're sleeping in a tent or you're working in a little bubble tent, right, through hypoxico or other company. Martin Zor has a special program around that. And he actually works specifically with Grajales already through the Rapid Ascent Expedition program. And I have worked actually with Martin quite a few times with various clients. And he handles some of the physical training, some of the hypoxico, pre-acclimatization training, and then I handle the breathwork training. So if you want to bring it all together into one place, we can obviously do that with Martin and myself. Okay, so those are all the ways to train. I'm going to leave you with one last message before we go into a Q&A session that isn't going to work well unless I get my tech wrangled in. But the last message that I have for you is from Lisa Thompson. She was the second ever USA woman to summit K2. And she has experience in doing the training herself and also with clients that have done the training. And what she says is, I can't overstate the value of Recal's breathwork training program. I've seen firsthand how this program helps my athletes acclimatize more efficiently, recover faster, and perform their best. Recal is a game changer for anyone looking to optimize their experience in the mountains. So that is kind of the parting words, final message. If you want to hang out for 1 second, I'm going to attempt to open up the Q&A. I don't know if I'm going to be able to change this setting. If you want to, even in this moment, you could send me an email. That may be the most efficient way, at anthony@recaltraining.com. Again, Anthony, my first name, at Recal, RECAL, training.com. If you send me that right now, I will do my best to monitor that. And if I don't get to it right now live, I will, of course, address your email and respond to you. But for the purpose of this live stream, let me just see if last minute I can actually change the setting to allow for comments, text feed. It does not. Live chat is disabled for this video. Nope, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to do it. So I'll go ahead and wrap up then. Again, take the assessment, take the Recal Breath Index, find out where your strengths are, where your weaknesses are in your breathing today, and then I will respond to you with ways in which you, in a customized way, can actually improve the weakest and build on some of those strengths. So take that RBI and find out how, quote unquote, ready you are to take on Aconcagua. With that, I will let you all go. Thanks so much again for joining. Once again, I'm Anthony from Recal. I'm here to wish you happy training. Me and my dog, Luna, as you see in the photo, are here to wish you happy training. Take care, everybody. Bye.